Welcome to another episode of FU Stigma Counseling Chats with Dr. Lott. Today, we're going to talk about the social, emotional, and behavioral impact of stigma on persons with schizophrenia. So as you can see, we're talking about the social, emotional, and psychological impact of stigma on adults with schizophrenia. This is something that I did back in my master's program. And I learned quite a bit about the population of schizophrenia. I've worked with them one-on-one for the last 10 or 11 years, but I also wanted to know more about how stigma impacts them. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So just follow along with me. I want you to first know that people with schizophrenia are able to live normal lives. I know that's a myth. A lot of people think that if someone has an illness such as schizophrenia, that they can't live normal, productive lives where they work and have families, but that is part of why stigma is so detrimental. That's not true. Although they may experience symptoms of psychosis, and some of those symptoms can be hallucinations or delusions, a lot of people manage them and are pretty productive and live a normal life just like everybody else. The examples that we see on TV and on the media don't necessarily portray the most common people with schizophrenia. They tend to show the most severe cases, and that's not always the case. It's less often than not the case. So I really wanted to give a voice to those who do have the mental illness but live a life that is fulfilling and a life that is productive. I wanted to introduce Ellen Sachs. So this is a YouTube video of someone with schizophrenia, and she kind of talks about her story. So be sure to watch this on your own time to really understand her story. Let me go back. Okay. So this is the YouTube link for Ellen Sachs, so be sure to watch that. All right, so what is the developmental trajectory of persons with schizophrenia? Halt and Tickle did a lot of work on people with schizophrenia, and they've learned that, like I said, the majority or 80% of people can live a productive and healthy life, right? They get married, they have families, relationships, jobs, careers, and that's if they stay on their medication as prescribed by their doctor, work their recovery, and continue toward having an in-depth understanding of their illness. Now, I might get a lot of backlash with this medication piece. I totally believe that medication is a personal choice. It is something that the person using the medication would know if it was most helpful. Some people find that the side effects of the medication is so bad that they rather just deal with the symptoms that they presented with in the first place. And if that is the case for you, who am I to say, no, you must take these medications? But research has shown that people who do find the right dose of medication, that does help to reduce a lot of their symptoms, especially the ones that get in the way of their career or their life or relationship, have found that the medication coupled with really being aware and understanding their mental illness has really been effective for them. So keep that in mind. The developmental trajectory of adults with schizophrenia. Did you know that this is done in 2015, I believe. So this number may have increased just a little bit, not by much, but 1% of adult population is diagnosed with schizophrenia. That's 2.2 million Americans. 25% will recover, and 10% die mostly by suicide. And I think the most heartbreaking thing is just knowing that adults with schizophrenia are 50 times more likely to attempt suicide, and they die 25 years sooner than the regular or the general population. You might be asking, why do they die 25 years sooner? And I think now that is 29 years. A lot of it has to do with insight. So a lot of people who have severe schizophrenia they're so wrapped up in their symptoms and the psychosis that a lot of things fall by the wayside. For instance, they don't go to the doctor as usual, as often as they need to, or they might be even paranoid about the doctors. They might have traumatic experiences working with doctors. Think about, being hospitalized or being forced to do something or stay somewhere you didn't want to stay. So they might be avoidant of the medical field altogether. So things get out of hand, whether it's high blood pressure, diabetes, or even more severe illnesses such as cancer. And by the time they do go, then it's too late. You know what I mean? So that's why they live shorter period of time than the average adult. So deviant trajectories of adults with schizophrenia. What does that mean? When adults with schizophrenia deviate from the norm, they experience isolation, psychosis, hospitalizations. They are at their lowest ability to function, poor med management when they are on prescribed medication, and less engagement with the mental health community. They also feel a sense of loneliness, which kind of leads to that isolation and stress. The sad part about this is the more that the person is dealing with their symptoms, the more that these things come into play. And the longer they go without treatment, the more severe these things are in play. So that's something to pay attention to. When they are not in optimal health, these things are like lurking around the corner. So one of the things that's important for you to know is it is not the schizophrenia itself that is the deviation. It is the decrease in one's social, emotional, occupational, cognitive, and psychological well-being that makes all the difference. So having schizophrenia is not the deviation. It's the impact of schizophrenia that's the deviation. It's the thing that throws them off from having healthy relationships and careers and psychological wellness. That is the deviation from the trajectory. So that's something to really pay attention to, that is not the disease itself, it's the impact of the disease. Deviant trajectories of adults with schizophrenia. So the big question is, what could cause one to deviate? And I'm so glad you asked. The answer is what? Stigma. That is why this channel is called FU Stigma. So there are two types of stigma. We have public stigma and self-stigma. There's a lot of studies on that, so if you want to go deep delver into that, please feel free to do so. But it stems from three things: stereotyping, discrimination, and prejudices, which I'll talk about in these next few slides. So stereotyping is when we make generalizations about people. For instance, all people with mental illness are dangerous. That is not true. It is so inaccurate, and it's one of the most profound stigma attitudes that I've seen do the most harm. Like, you just automatically assume that people with schizophrenia are dangerous. When we stereotype, we make judgment based on the way someone looks, and we group or categorize people and don't give them individual characteristics. We just say they're all this way. There's a lot of stereotypes used in media, in common conversations, everyday conversations, so you can pretty much hear them anywhere. But the more you know about them, the more you can say something. Stigma also develops from prejudice, so having a cognitive and affective response. So you evaluate a person, it's evaluative, you're judging them. And this then leads to discrimination, which is a behavioral reaction. And when we look at discrimination, it's basically the purposeful act of devaluing or degrading or excluding against a particular stigmatized group. If you look at this little drawing down here, the M&Ms are saying, hey, don't discriminate against the M&M that has the M at the top of his head versus the bottom of his head, because we're all the same on the inside. So that's like a simplistic way of thinking about it. When we discriminate, especially when you're in a place of power, think about landlords. They could say, I don't want people with schizophrenia living in my building, so I'm not going to rent to them. That's something that impacts that group, and it's an action or behavior which describes discrimination in this setting. How do we perpetuate the problem? We make things worse when we reinforce these stereotypes. So That means repeating things that are inaccurate or not stopping people when they are saying something that we know isn't right. Untreated people who are visible on our streets present an image that people respond to with fear and avoidance. So if you've ever walked down the street and you've seen someone talking to themselves or batting at the wind, and they just seem really out of it, these sort of experiences can lead us to say, well, then they all must be like that. And then we start to get fearful and we avoid. We cross the street, we grab our purse, we clutch our purses. We know what that means. We pull our kids closer because we don't want to be associated. Well, that helps reinforce the stereotype. Ignorance is the leading problem when it comes to perpetuating. We don't know enough about the people. We don't understand what they are going through. We don't understand the illness. And when we don't understand something, we make assumptions and we make up our own stuff. So that's what gets us in trouble. We care about this because the stigma associated with schizophrenia prohibits a normal life for those living with schizophrenia. How? Social impact of stigma. Socially, someone with schizophrenia usually experiences discrimination and systematic barriers, whether that's in laws or procedures or billing, or whether that's in laws or policies or government funds that are available for this group being withheld. Those are systematic barriers. To give an example, they get lonely, there's a lack of support, people don't understand them, they're underrepresented. So that again goes back in a larger society. Is this group a focus? Is this a group that people are paying attention to try to figure out how to best support? They're misrepresented by media and they're vulnerable to be mistreated by others. Some people argue with this. They say, oh, how can they be vulnerable when they're the violent ones or they're the ones that are attacking people or whatever it is? But that's not the case. Usually whatever is going on internally for them has nothing to do with this outside thing. And you're on the outside. They could care less about what's going on with you. They're battling with something that might be internal. And because of that, and because of their lack of support, and maybe they're wanting to connect with other people, they get taken advantage of. Sometimes they can be more trusting than they should be. And then you have the opposite too, where they just don't trust anyone because of maltreatment in the past. Here's another YouTube link for 2 individuals who talk about the social impact of stigma. So be sure to either copy this link or click it after this video. So there was a study done on people who have schizophrenia. We found out that 43% of respondents in this study said that they would tell their friends they had schizophrenia. So that means 57% of people, the majority of people, would not tell anyone. They would keep it a secret. 27% admitted that they might be embarrassed if a family member had an illness. Nearly 1/4 of respondents reported that they would not want to have a coworker that had schizophrenia, even if they were in treatment. 34% would not want a boss who had schizophrenia. Notice the word schizophrenic coworker underlined. That is not my writing. I would never use the word schizophrenic because that is not person-centered. It's not a people-first language. No one is schizophrenic. It's someone who has a mental illness of schizophrenia, or is someone who has a diagnosis of schizophrenia, not a schizophrenic coworker. You see the difference in the language and how you respond to somebody. You don't go walk up to somebody and say, hi, I'm Cancer Tina. You know what I mean? Or I'm high blood pressure Susie. No, you're Susie and you have high blood pressure. Just like the person with schizophrenia is Tim, and Tim has schizophrenia. So be mindful of that. That's another thing that we can pay attention to in our everyday lives that helps to decrease stigma. And then nearly 50% of those polled wouldn't want to date a person with schizophrenia, even if the person was in treatment. So I'm really curious to know if you can comment. What are your thoughts on this? Would you date someone who has schizophrenia? Why or why not? What are your concerns? And then, play devil's advocate with yourself. If you're on the fence and like, nope, I wouldn't do it, tell me a reason why you might consider doing it. Why would you consider befriending someone who had a severe mental illness? What are the benefits of that? So I'd love to see your comments. So there's a psychological and cognitive impact of stigma, and those impacts include a lack of motivation due to stigmatizing factors. So if people say that they aren't capable and they can't do a good job and they are not supposed to be in a relationship, and they keep hearing it over and over again all throughout their lives, that tends to sink in at some point. So why try? That's that attitude. Negative self-talk: I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I'm not capable, I can't do this, I never do anything right, just all day, every day, on top of the voices that they probably hear that aren't pleasant, because usually people don't report pleasant voices, they report distressing voices, the ones that tell them they're a piece of shit or nothing, or they should die or go run in front of a train or do all sorts of things. They have to deal with their own self-stigma and the voices a lot of the times. And the other psychological impact is stress. Stress is a trigger, and it usually is the predecessor to an episode. There's emotional impact of stigma, and that includes the inner turmoil that we kind of touched on, the sense of not belonging or just feeling like you're in this by yourself, and then low self-esteem and low self-worth. And then unfortunately, like we talked about earlier, suicidal ideations, because it becomes so overwhelming at times to be so isolated. And then also, if they don't find relief from their symptoms, especially people experiencing, loud, scary, intrusive hallucinations, whether those are visual or auditorial, it can be really hard to get up every day and deal with that, I can imagine. So how can we help? Are we a part of the solution or the disease? I got that from a Coldplay song, so that's not bad. I want to be a part of the solution. I hope you do too. So we need to educate ourselves as clinicians, as lay people, as nurses, as mailmen, as janitors, as moms, as dads. I don't care what it is you do. Everybody has a role and plays a part. So understand more about the mental illness. Understand that nobody woke up and said, you know what, I think I want schizophrenia this morning. I can't wait to hear voices. I can't wait to feel all these negative symptoms. I can't wait to feel like I'm not in touch with reality. No one asked for this. No one asked for it. And if you can come from that place, and the place of compassion and understanding that this is something that happened to them that they did not ask for, that they would not wish on their worst enemy, but they have it, maybe it can help you to be more sensitive to it if that's something that you struggle with, especially in the understanding part. Educate the person with schizophrenia. So with that one, that is if you have someone who's maybe newly diagnosed or someone who doesn't have much insight into schizophrenia, this is a good place to kind of talk to them about, these are the symptoms, this is what it looked like, this is what you might experience, these are the most common things. But still remember that they're individual and they might have different symptoms. So being open and willing to have that conversation. And then educate the public. You want to make sure that when you hear someone say something that is not right or is inaccurate or pushes stigmatizing attitudes or is discriminating, prejudiced, or stereotyping, say something. It is the only way that this behavior is not going to be accepted. If we say something and say, hey, that's not okay, this is actually what's going on, here's a website. There's a link here for you to get some more information on that as well. Another website that has been helpful for people with the illness and people who want to support someone with the illness is called helpguide.org, HELPGUIDE.org. It is a website that was developed from a couple. I think they had a kid that had a severe mental illness, and I think that kid committed or completed suicide, and they didn't understand the illness. It's not that they weren't supportive, but they didn't understand the illness. So they developed this website, and it has all of the mental health conditions on there: anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, personality disorders, everything on there in layman terms for everyday people to read and understand. And it also has a tab there for you to click where you can find out how to best support someone with schizophrenia. And then a person with schizophrenia or whatever the mental illness they have they can go in there and read about it themselves. So something to check out, helpguide.org. I just talked about like making sure that you stand up and not be a bystander. Don't just let stuff happen. Say something if you know different. This is how we change these attitudes. And then you want to have contact. So why don't you go and volunteer at a facility where people with severe mental illness live. For 3.5 years, I was an executive director at a facility, and everyone in the facility had a severe mental illness. So I was surrounded by people with mental illness, and it's an experience you just can't really describe. And I am very grateful to them for what I learned, for them allowing me to be a part of their world, for trusting me, and for just having that connection and relationship. I think that people with mental illness, especially severe mental illness like schizophrenia, I think they're some of the most resilient people I've ever met. And it always makes me think about my own mental health. I never used to be thankful for that, because you know how you just wake up and it's like, oh great, I woke up this morning, or oh, I have the ability to breathe, or I can use my legs. Well, now my prayer includes, thank goodness for my mental health. I'm so glad that my mental health is in a good place today. It just taught me to be grateful. So shout out to them. And then also you want to normalize and accept. So meet people where they are, understand their story from their perspective, and don't judge. I'm hoping that from this presentation, you've learned a lot about stereotypes around schizophrenia. I hope that you have a new sense of hope and understanding about this group. And I hope that you can help in the battle to destigmatize mental illness, stand up when you see or hear something that isn't right, or continuing to stigmatize this group. That is how we do our part. I know it's a big thing, but these small steps is a way to the bigger goal. These are my resources. You can always contact me if you want more resources. I think that is all of them. I hope that this episode today was helpful. And I hope that you have a good understanding about how stigma impacts people in all different aspects of their lives. So I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.